Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Jackie and I'm an aspiring writer, and at the moment I am attempting to plot out two different book ideas using The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. If you are not new here, you'll know that this is taking far longer than any of my other plotting and outlining experiments. Generally, I get through a craft book in 1 to 2 videos, and this is now episode 4 of this series where we are looking at chapter 4, which is the book's moral argument. So the moral argument of your book is the lesson that you want people to take away after reading it. It can come through theme, symbolism, maybe dialogue, but that's a very heavy-handed way of doing it. And in this chapter, Truby starts with figuring out 1, what your moral argument is, so the argument you want to make in the book, and then 2, structuring your plot to convey that argument, which I think is a really fascinating way of doing it. The problem is, I don't tend to write things with moral arguments. I tend to write things that are fun because I want to escape from the world. So I'm not sure how I'm going to go with this. When it comes to the ideas I'm working on, the first one is what I'm calling my fantasy hot mess because I still can't figure out a name. It is a book I wrote when I was 19 and I picked it up again last year when I decided to get back into writing. So I have a 111,000 word draft that needs to be thrown out and rewritten because it is a hot mess of everything that I loved at the time of writing. That doesn't really form a cohesive story. So that's one thing. The other one is a brand new idea, which is codenamed DID Mystery, and it's a murder mystery from the point of view of someone with dissociative identity disorder, and she needs to work with her alters to solve the mystery as different alters are getting different clues. So the reason I chose these 2 books is because one of them obviously has a lot to work with and one of them doesn't. So it's interesting to see how the different exercises in the Anatomy of Story can help a project that's in both of those stages. When it comes to the moral argument, I'm a bit worried because the fantasy hot mess does have a moral argument, which is around the idea of progress at all costs. And when it comes to the values of all of the characters, they tend to sit on a continuum, ranging from those who want to uphold like the past, tradition, magic in this world, and those who are happy to kill everything from the old world to bring in new technology and the Industrial Revolution and so on. So that one, I'm fairly comfortable I have the moral argument. So it's going to be interesting to see how I go with the exercises in this chapter. My DID mystery book does not have a moral argument. I think I actually mentioned this in the last video, which was on character, where there is a journey the main character goes through, but it's not really a moral issue. So I have no idea how I'm going to approach these exercises with that in mind. The good news, though, is that this is a much shorter chapter than the one on character, so if it takes a long time, that's because of me, not because of the book. So what do we need to do? Well, as I mentioned, it starts with figuring out the moral argument and then organizing that into a plot. So the exercises at the end of the chapter are: 1, create a theme line based on your book's designing principle. 2, write down the key choice the hero must make at the end of the story, so this is a moral choice. 3, the moral problem your hero will have to confront throughout the story. 4, positioning each of the characters as a variation on that theme. And then putting the characters' values in conflict. So those last 2 are actually doubling up on some of the work from last chapter, so hopefully that won't take too long. And then finally, we have the big moral argument exercise, which is going through the plot. So we have the beliefs and values the hero starts with, their moral weakness, their moral need, and then we get into the actions, which revolve around the hero taking immoral actions and not being able to make progress towards their goal until like the moral piece clicks into place. So I'm really excited to tackle plot from this perspective because I never have before. I am a bit worried about one of my books not having a moral argument though, so this is going to be interesting. So exercise 1 is figuring out the theme line of your book, which is another way of saying like the moral of the story. And I don't have any issues with like finding that. I don't really like the way Truby recommends going about it, which he says, go back to the designing principle you created back when you were doing the story's premise and try to figure out a theme line based on that. Now, my understanding of the designing principle is that your premise is what the story is about, and the designing principle is how you're going to tell it. So for DID Mystery, if the story is about a murder mystery, the designing principle is that it's going to be told through the eyes of someone with dissociative identity disorder and the different alters needing to work together to solve the murder, as opposed to any other murder mystery that might be told in a more traditional way. So there are two problems here. One is that my fantasy hot mess doesn't have a designing principle, and it didn't then, it doesn't now. I don't know what the designing principle would be. And two is that it's sometimes a bit difficult to see the relationship between the designing principle and the theme line or the moral. So I'll give you some of the examples that Truby shares in this chapter. For Ulysses, the designing principle is, in a modern odyssey through the city over the course of a single day, one man finds a father and the other man finds a son. Theme line, the true hero is the man who endures the slings and arrows of everyday life and shows compassion to another person in need. My question here is, how did you get the theme line from the designing principle? Like, I prefer to work with the premise in general. Similarly, Harry Potter, the designing principle is a magician prince learns to be a man and a king by attending a boarding school for sorcerers over the course of 7 school years. The theme line, when you are blessed with great talent and power, you must become a leader and sacrifice for the good of others. Again, these are both from the same story, but I don't see how you get one based on the designing principle. So for me, it was easier to just go straight to the theme line and not worry about the designing principle at all. So what I have for my fantasy hot mess is sometimes there is too great a cost to progress. Which, now that I say it, I don't know if that's the theme for this particular book, because this is a very big world in my head, which happens when something's been living in your head for over 10 years. And that more relates to like the prequel trilogy, if there's ever a prequel trilogy, which is from 30 to 20 years ago when there was a war and a genocide and they tried to wipe out magic in order to make room for science and technology. So that's a clear theme line from the earlier books, and in this one the antagonist is like trying to restore the old ways. I don't know, I do think like that is the lesson that the protagonist learns though. It still feels right to me. So I don't know, I mean, again, if you've been watching these videos, you'll know that basically every time I try to like do one of the exercises for this book, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think we're just gonna have to like go through the anatomy of story, and then I'll have to try writing this book and we'll see if it works. For DID Mystery, the hero's character arc, and the hero is the host of her system, so the one who generally fronts in the body. Her whole arc is that she's aware she has DID, but she doesn't want it. She wants to ignore it. She wants to be in control of the body as much as possible. She is fighting the alters and not making any room for communication or collaboration with them. So the lesson is around learning to accept these parts of herself and work with them in order to solve the crime, because like one of the other alters is actually the one that witnessed the crime, so she doesn't have all of the information on her own. So for that theme line, I thought something along the lines of, only when we know ourselves can we unlock our true potential, because it's only by like knowing and accepting all the various facets of herself that she can solve the crime in the book. The next step is the hero's moral choice, and I'm going to need to take a few minutes to go and work on this because off the top of my head, I'm not sure what it is for either of them. So I've been looking at the moral choices for both of my books, and I was struggling with both of them because, as I mentioned earlier, there are themes, there are character journeys, but I wouldn't call them like really moral things, especially not with DID Mystery. So I started thinking, and I thought I could create a choice where the character needs to choose between getting everything they've wanted and doing the right thing, because that seems to be fairly common in the examples John Truby gives. So if I read a couple of them. Casablanca, when Rick's ex-love Ilsa returns to him, he can use 2 exit visas to escape with her to America. Rick chooses fighting the Nazis over his love for Ilsa. So there we have a choice between what he wants, which is Ilsa, and doing the right thing, which is fighting the Nazis. Similarly, The Maltese Falcon, Detective Sam Spade discovers that Bridget O'Shanahan lovely Irish names, murdered his partner. When the police show up, Spade chooses justice over the woman he loves. So again, what he wants is the woman he loves, but he does the right thing. So in my case, for Fantasy Hot Mess, Perry, our hero, really wants to be an engineer. She wants to give up magic. She's sort of just doing it as a chore. She's a very talented, ambitious engineer, and at the beginning of the book, she has an exhibit at the World's Fair, which is hoping will be her ticket out of Daramon. The second hero or ally, I'm not entirely sure what his role is yet, because this is a hot mess. He is the third son of the king, but has been locked in a tower for almost a decade and escaped, which is how he ended up here. And what he really wants is recognition and an official place by his father's side. So what I thought was maybe we could have a situation at the end of the book where Rain, who's... I need to come up with a better title for him, but at the moment he's the headmaster of the university where they are, also rules the city-state that they live in. And I thought he could basically come up with a deal for them. He could offer them everything they wanted in exchange for hush-hushing everything that happened in the book, which was they stamped out an uprising of mages. And I thought that would work because it is a moral decision and they could respond with hell no, and that would be nice for setting the stage for the next book, which is trying to create a more balanced world that doesn't just completely throw out everything from the past for the sake of progress. The problem is that if that doesn't happen until the very end of the book, it doesn't affect the story in the current book. It just sets it up for the sequel. So I was thinking about how I could work it in, and then I thought maybe before the final battle scene, because there is an epic final battle in an underground dungeon which is on fire. And in the original one I wrote when I was 19, I can't quite remember. In fact, I don't think there was any reason why they were there. It was just a cool setting. And I really liked the battle and the settings. I wanted to keep it. But I remember last year when I was trying to rewrite this, I was really struggling to figure out, okay, how do we get everyone into this place in a way that makes sense? And so I thought that maybe like the mages could have been funneled into there somehow. It could be a trap and they're getting locked down there to basically die, which is horrible, but it works given the mindset of and the values of the world. And maybe Perry and Aubrey could find out as it's happening and they want to go, and Rain's like, no, just all you need to do is wait. There's nothing for you to do. Just wait half an hour and it's all over. And if you wait and keep quiet, I will orchestrate all of this for you. So they have the choice between everything they've ever wanted and doing the right thing, even though the right thing would involve saving the opponent or giving the opponent an opportunity to be saved. So I thought that could work better. That does then raise problems with the battle scene in that why would it be a battle rather than everyone just escaping? But that is a problem for future Jackie. So I think that would work. For DID Mystery, I feel like it's still not a moral choice, but it's the stuff I was talking about back in the character video, which is she wants control. She wants to hold back the altars. She wants to be in control of her life. But in order to solve the murder, she needs to let the altars out. Yeah, so it's a difficult decision because it feels like, it's doing the right thing, so find the killer, find the evidence that he's guilty, versus self-preservation. It's not really a moral choice though, which is annoying because until I just talked through it, I thought I had it, and clearly I don't, so I'll need to think about that some more. Then when it comes to the characters as variations on the theme, for fantasy hot mess, that is the continuum of history, past, magic over here versus science, technology, progress, the future over here, and this at all costs. And everyone's on that continuum, so I feel like that still works. Does the moral choice have anything to do with the theme though? This is a mess. Why is it a mess? Why can't I figure it out? So we've got a moral choice, but the moral choice isn't clearly connected to the theme. Does it have to be? Actually, and this is something that's a little bit challenging about the book, in that we have the theme line exercise that I went through earlier in some of the examples, and then we have this moral decision. The problem is all of the examples of moral decisions Truby gives, they're not from the same movies as the examples he gives for the theme line. So it actually makes it impossible to see how one relates to the other, which means I don't know if what I'm doing is acceptable or not. So in the comments, as per usual, if you know the anatomy of story well, tell me if I'm doing it wrong. So if we go back to characters as variations on a theme though, in Fantasy Hot Mess, it is that continuum of history, magic versus science, future. In DID Mystery, there are sort of two opposing values. One is control versus freedom, and the other one's order versus chaos. So I think the work I did in the character chapter still holds up for this, so I'm going to skip that for now. The next thing we get to is constructing the moral argument through the structure of your story. And this I was really struggling with because we have a list of things that you need to cover. So we have values, moral weakness, moral need, first immoral action, desire, drive, more immoral actions, and so on. And what I got stuck with when I started with Fantasy Hot Mess was that I wasn't sure what sequence everything should happen in. So when the desire takes place, is that like just an initial desire the hero has, or is that the thing that sets the plot in motion? Are you only allowed to have one immoral action before that desire kicks in? So one of the things that's a little bit of a struggle about this is that it's not clear when everything happens, and that's where I think methods like Save the Cat and story engineering are a little bit easier to work with, because Save the Cat, it splits the story into 3 acts, and you also have this storyboard exercise where you've basically got it in 4 rows and you move post-it notes or cards around. So you can see where everything's meant to fall. And in the 15 story beats, he tells you which act they're supposed to fall in. So you get a sense of where they are in the story and how much should happen before or after them. Similarly, in story engineering, Larry Brooks breaks up story into percentages. So you know when the major things are meant to happen and how much space there is between them. With this is just a list of things, and I'm not sure when the middle of the story is, when the inciting incident, when the turning point is, and so on. And yeah, maybe this will become clearer when I get to the plot chapter at the end, but at the moment I'm not sure which action should go where, because I'm not sure how far through the story each of these points are. So I decided, rather than trying to do it with my own book, I thought, why not look at another story? Because he does have a lot of examples in here, but a lot of them are, I mean, he has Tootsie in there a lot, so that's not a particularly serious film, but in this chapter he has Casablanca as the one I'm most familiar with, and that's a fairly heavy story, and I'm trying not to write fairly heavy stories. So I thought, let's look at The Incredibles, because The Incredibles is awesome. So I went through the script and here's what I got. So the first thing is values. Mr. Incredible values being a superhero above living a normal life. I also put he values working alone, because these are 2 themes that come up through the story. His weaknesses, one is the idea of working alone, so he doesn't turn to others, he doesn't get their support. The other one is that he keeps lashing out or doing undercover hero work when it could risk relocating his family again, and he's lying about it. He doesn't tell Helen, his wife, what he's doing. His need is that he needs to be honest with his family because they are stronger together. So that sort of draws in both of those weaknesses, the one where he's hiding what he's doing and the other one where he feels like he works best alone. So by being honest and working together, they're stronger. So his first immoral action in the story is going out with Frozone to listen to the police recorder, and they catch a jewelry robbery in action. His second immoral action is getting angry with his boss and losing his job. Both of these he doesn't tell Helen about. She needs to find out about them independently. His desire is to be a hero again, and the opportunity to do this is set up by Syndrome. So the reason I mention that is because the desire is supposed to bring him into conflict with the opponent, which this does, even though he doesn't realize it yet, because he doesn't meet Syndrome as the opponent until later in the film. Drive, so these are the actions he takes to achieve that desire. The first one is he decides to meet Mirage, but before we get into the other ones, he actually takes a third immoral action, which is that he lies to Helen about losing his job, and he says that when he's going to meet Mirage, it's a business conference he's been sent on. We go back to Drive, which is he defeats the Omnidroid on the island, he gets back in shape, and he gets a new super suit. Then Attack by Ally. So Helen is the ally. She discovers that he repaired his suit, and she goes to see Edna behind his back to find out what's going on. So that's not a direct attack. She doesn't attack him, but she is investigating his actions. So I think this counts. Then we get to Obsessive Drive. So Obsessive Drive is the next step in this moral argument structure. However, this moral argument structure isn't the complete plot, so there's stuff that happens before this. So what I consider to be the obsessive drive here is once he realizes who Syndrome is and decides he needs to stop him. However, there are a few things that happen between the attack of the ally and the obsessive drive in order for us to get to that point. So we've got Bob going back to the island, he's attacked by a new robot, he discovers Syndrome, the opponent, and that everything was a setup, and he discovers all of the other supers that Syndrome has killed. So I think that moment when he discovers everyone that Syndrome has killed, That's when it moves beyond pure survival to we've got to stop this guy. So that's the obsessive drive. Then we have all of the actions that take place in this part of the story. And what's interesting is it's not just him, because Helen and the kids get involved. So he makes his way back into the lair, searches the database for Elastigirl to see if they've found her. Helen flies to the island after Bob. The kids have stowed away. They survive the missiles. They make their way through the lair to find Bob. Kids fight goons in the jungle, and they escape from Syndrome. Then we have the battle, which is the next point in the moral argument. So here they go back home, the Omnidroid has been set loose, and Bob realizes that they need to work together in order to defeat it. He originally says, I don't know if it's to Helen as well as the kids or just the kids, but he wants them to run away, go hide, be safe. And they're like, no, we're fighting this as a family. So the final action is when they get back home and Syndrome has tried to steal Jack Jack, he throws Helen to save Jack Jack. So I feel like that could be a couple of things. One, again, it's not him working alone. And two, it could also be letting someone else have the glory. He doesn't need to be the only hero. So the self-revelation is that he's stronger when he doesn't work alone, as opposed to his belief beforehand where he only works alone. And the decision was letting the family fight with him. So it was really easy to do this actually, which I think shows like just what a good film The Incredibles is and how well structured it is. So now that I've done this, I think I'm going to sit on this overnight and just let it marinate. And hopefully when I come back to this tomorrow, I'll have a little bit more insight into how to create this structure for a new book, as well as fix my hot mess of a fantasy story and organize it in this way. So I will see you tomorrow. It has been a week since I last filmed, and I've been thinking about the moral argument exercises the entire time. Also, someone outside is using a leaf blower. I'm not sure if you can hear it. It's very annoying, but it is what it is. Anyway, it's been a week since I filmed. I've been thinking about the moral argument the entire time, and I'm having a few different problems with this. One is I'm not sure whether the immoral actions that take place early in the moral argument structure are supposed to be related to the overall moral argument, or whether they can just be immoral in general. And because I'm not familiar with all of the examples in the book, I really don't have a lot of basis for comparison. And I've also tried Googling this, and there is very little discussion on this part of the anatomy of story online. So in my fantasy hot mess, the moral choice that I thought could happen towards the end of the book is the choice between letting the mages burn and saving Daramon, which is a representation of everything that the protagonist believes, so progress at all costs, versus setting them free but potentially letting Daramon be destroyed and also, not getting what she wants, because I thought one of the characters could sort of bribe her to let them die, just leave the door locked. So that works well in the world of the book. I think it could be an interesting moment for the characters. It works well with the theme, which is sometimes progress comes at too great a cost. However, then when I went back and tried to do the structure, which starts with the hero taking a moral action, then finding their desire, then drive, then various immoral actions up until we get to the final battle, I first thought, well, maybe what she wants in the current version of the book, what she wants at the beginning is to basically secure her future outside of university. So she's presenting at the World's Fair and is hoping that will lead to a job offer with a prestigious engineering firm. And in the draft I wrote, she originally didn't get to present because someone changed the name to her partner's name at the last minute. So she was all in a huff about that and went to complain to the headmaster / ruler of the town / father figure. And that led to various things that aren't going to happen anymore. But now I thought potentially we could still keep that. And that could lead to him giving her a test, which is to learn about the MacGuffin in the book, which is the thing that gets the plot going. And I thought, okay, well, maybe we make getting the MacGuffin her desire line, or at least understanding the MacGuffin so she can get what she wants. And then I thought, well, an immoral action, so in the original version of the book it was given to her, I thought maybe in this version she could steal it because that's immoral. But that has nothing to do with the theme of the book or the great moral argument that the book's about. So I don't know if that's an acceptable immoral action or not. Another challenge I'm having is that I like my characters to be good people. Like, they're not black and white. Everyone's grey. Everyone does stupid things or selfish things or makes mistakes. But I don't really have characters that are actively malicious. And even my antagonists, not so much. Like, for the 4 people in the world who have read Powerless at this point, out of 10, the antagonist isn't actively malicious or evil. He's more pursuing his goals at any cost, and he doesn't really care if it costs his children's well-being or lives and so on. Similarly, there's this doctor character who tortures the protagonist in that book, and again, he's not evil or malicious. He's a scientist. He's doing it to see what will happen. So my characters are a lot like that, and when you put it through that lens, I mean, yes, I suppose you can say they're doing bad things, they're immoral, but coming at it from the angle of what can this person do that is really bad is really difficult for me to get my head around, so maybe I just need to change the wording there. The other challenge I'm having is, again, with the wording, just the idea of having a morality focus at all. So because I was having so much trouble with the fantasy hot mess, I decided to put that aside and went back to look at DID mystery. And as you know, DID mystery doesn't really have like a moral theme or argument. It's really about knowing yourself and sort of coming into your true power once you accept and acknowledge who you are. So with that in mind, I was able to go through the values, weakness, need, and then for the immoral actions, I thought that could relate to the investigation. So first immoral action, I have the character lying about where she was at the time of the murder, because basically I want this book to start with her like standing over the dead body, covered in blood, and no idea how she got there, because another altar was at the front when the murder happened. So she needs to get back to her room somehow. I'm thinking everyone's like in a hotel or on an island for some family event, and that will create they're all stuck in the same place until the investigation's over dynamic that you need. But anyway, she, covered in blood, sees the body, like books it to get out of there, and someone asks where she was and she lies. So that could be an immoral action. The desire is to find the murderer, obviously. Drive is the things you do in order to achieve that desire. So I thought she would start with basically trying to figure out what happened and where she was the previous day. Next immoral action, I thought maybe she could hide what she's learned and what she knows from the investigator. So that's impeding the investigation. And it's also helping the opponent because it's preventing the killer from being caught. Attack by ally, I thought Travis, who's one of the alters, could take over to start putting things together and potentially, yeah, I haven't really thought this through, but I don't know if he'll make the situation better or worse, but he's the protector alter. He is the one who's most in favor of collaboration and communication between all of them. So I think he'll know more about what's happening or what each of the different alters know than Diana, the main host, will. So yeah, he could take over. That could be the attack by the ally. Obsessive drive. So I think something will happen that makes her realize who the killer is. And now, rather than just finding the murderer or proving her innocent, she needs to find a way to incriminate him. A moral action, maybe planting evidence. Yeah, and then we get to the battle, which is some confrontation with the killer, and so on. So here, again, we've got immoral actions, but it's not really related to the central theme, which is around knowing yourself. Again, anyone who knows the anatomy of story really well, my question is, do the immoral actions need to be related to the main theme line or moral argument of the book, or can they be any immoral actions that the hero is taking out of desperation or because they haven't learnt what they need to learn yet? So please let me know. So my status at the moment is fantasy hot mess is still a hot mess. I'm not sure what to do with it, or I want there to be hope because like I love this story and these characters in this world, and there's already so much there. So I would love to turn it into something coherent, but I don't know if there is hope. For DID mystery, I feel like everything's making sense, but it's not a moral tale. So I don't know if it meets John Truby's criteria. The other thing that's a little frustrating is that even though like I'm going through the steps, everything's still very vague. It's like, yes, she lies about where she was or she plants evidence, but it's what evidence does she plant? And I'm not entirely sure whether I'm supposed to be figuring out all of that now or whether at this stage in the process it's okay just to have the really broad strokes and I'll continue fleshing them out in the later chapters. So it's going to be interesting to see how I go. My main concern at the moment is I'm going to stay stuck on this stage and I'll never get through this process and I'll never write anything new again, which is not ideal since I haven't met any of my writing goals this year. But Yeah. We'll see. I'll check back in tomorrow. It is the next day, and I've decided that it's time for me to give up on the moral argument. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I mean, there's one reason for this, it's just I'm not getting anywhere and I'd like to move forward. But I also think there's value in moving forward with the other steps in the anatomy of story and then coming back to this once I have a little bit more information, particularly because one of the things John Truby says in this chapter as well as the plot chapter is that all of the points he lists aren't necessarily in order. So I'm hoping, at least, once I have a clearer idea of the plot of each book, then I'll have a better idea about the different immoral actions they can take. So, where am I? Well, with DID Mystery, I ended up deciding just to go with what I had yesterday. So, if I flip forward to that page, okay, so we have her values of safety, control, predictability, weaknesses, she's a control freak and she's afraid of her alters. Her need is to acknowledge and accept that she has alters in order to heal and to recognize that they can work stronger together as a system. Her first immoral action is lying about her whereabouts at the time of the murder. Her desire is to find the murderer, and her drive is tracing her steps to figure out where she was the day before when the murder happened. The second immoral action is hiding her findings from the investigator on the case and even sending him on a wild goose chase to buy herself time. And then attack by an ally. I think, as I said yesterday, that's when her alter Travis comes to the front, and I was thinking he could come clean to the investigator about their disorder and what's happening. So it is in everyone's best interest because that'll help the murderer get caught, but it's also like a betrayal to Diana, who doesn't want anyone to know. Then we get the obsessive drive, so now she's a suspect, which means she needs to clear her name. I also thought what could happen here is maybe she realizes who the killer is, and that creates this obsessive drive to figure out how to get him caught, even incriminate him. And I'm in two minds about this because, one, if we find out who the killer is at this stage, that then takes the mystery out of the book. But that's not necessarily a problem. That just means the main conflict or question isn't figuring out who the murderer is, it's figuring out how to make him pay for his crimes when no one suspects him. And the reason I think it might be good to have it here is because I think the immoral actions that come out of trying to get him caught would be stronger than the immoral actions that would come out of her trying to clear her name, because if she's trying to make sure he gets caught, that's when we come into planting evidence. So yeah, for third immoral action, I've got planting or destroying evidence. The battle, that's a final confrontation with the killer where she's able to use the knowledge gained from her alters to push him into making a confession, perhaps. There's also a final action against the opponent, which I'm not sure about. It could be set up so he's being recorded without knowing it, or maybe the investigator's listening in, so I need to think about that a bit more. The moral self-revelation is that she acknowledges and accepts her alters and recognizes that they're stronger when they work together. Her moral decision is letting go of control to work with the alters rather than trying to, push them down and figure out everything herself. And the final step is the thematic revelation. So what's the thematic revelation of the book? And I guess yay for teamwork, but I don't really have anything. So all in all, I think this works quite well. I feel like the immoral actions are genuinely immoral. She is getting in the way of a murder investigation, even if her motivations are understandable or even good. But I think this works, even though... No, I'm just going to leave it there. I think this works. Well done, Jackie. I deserve credit for that. Now, then we have to look at my fantasy hot mess, which is still a hot mess. So as per usual, the reason I'm struggling with a fantasy hot mess is because I have so much and there's a big question about how to organize it. And to be honest, I'm perfectly okay with cutting most of the book, but there are some things I want to keep because if I don't, then it's not the same story. So I do want to keep 3. In fact, I do want to keep the entire cast of characters, but there are 3 main ones I really want to keep, which are the 2 allies and the opponent. I want the inciting incident or turning point to be when the MacGuffin goes missing, because that's something that all 3 of them are invested in, and I want the final battle to be in the dungeon. I also want the whole message about progress at all costs, and I want the history of this world where they did try to wipe out magic in a previous war, and the main characters learn about this through the book. So with all of that in mind, I am planning to rewrite this from scratch. I'm expecting most of the scenes I have in the current version of the book will be cut. There are a handful of them that I really like that I might rewrite and keep in there in some form. But other than the MacGuffin going missing and the final battle scene, basically everything else is up for grabs. The challenge is that even though like that feels really open when I say it like that, it's just hard to complete these exercises knowing that that's where I'm going almost. It's really hard to explain without context. But what you'll see as I go through this is that there's a chunk in the middle which is empty, and in fact I was having so much trouble with this that I jumped forward to the chapter on plot and attempted to do the 22 plot steps, and the exact same thing happened. There's a chunk in the middle where I wasn't able to fill in the exact events, and like I said earlier, I'm not sure if part of this is because it's not clear where in the book all of these things are happening, because there are far more than 22 scenes in this book. It's like the Save the Cat beat sheet, which has 15 beats. There are far more than 15 different things that happen in a screenplay or a novel, but they're the most important ones. And with this, because I'm not starting with this, so with DID Mystery, I'm starting with this, which makes it easier to just come up with those key points, and then I can add other stuff in as I need it. Whereas with Fantasy Hot Mess, I have all of the other stuff, and it almost feels like I'm either shoehorning in the important stuff or I'm trying to figure out how to turn the stuff I already have into important stuff, and I'm just, I'm not quite getting there. So I don't know if it's just the question my husband's asked me maybe 3 different times today is maybe you should just give up on this book. Clearly you haven't done it well if you can't make this method work, which is a possibility. I'm also not sure, maybe it's just this method doesn't work for it. And then the other thing, which is a distinct possibility, is that I'm just not smart enough for the anatomy of story, which is okay. I'm still fairly new as a writer, and I do feel like this book is very advanced. It's far more advanced than any of the other craft books I've looked at. But it's frustrating not to be able to finish an exercise. So what I've got the values. Perry believes that Daramon is a technological utopia and believes in the unspoken mantra of progress at all costs. Her moral weaknesses, she's stubborn, short-sighted, and has this blind faith in Daramon. So she is willing to follow that philosophy and follow what Rain, who's the head of the town and the institution, says without questioning. So her need is to question herself and her world and to be open to new possibilities to build a brighter future. Now, in the moral argument structure, the first immoral action is supposed to happen before the desire, but I can't think of anything that would happen before that. So I've started with the desire and then had an immoral action. So her general desire is respect and recognition. So she does look different to everyone else in this world, and she's looked down on because of it. So she really wants respect and recognition. She believes she can achieve this by using the World's Fair to obtain a position at a prestigious engineering company once she graduates. What happens in the first part of the book is she is basically given a challenge to learn about the MacGuffin in the book in order to get a chance to present at the fair. So the immoral action she takes is she steals the MacGuffin and then has it stolen from her. That isn't an immoral action on her part, but it leads into the next bit, which is the drive, where she agrees to a temporary alliance with Aubrey, who also wants the MacGuffin, in order to find it. So the actions they're taking in this drive section are looking for the thief, trying to learn more about it in order to find it, and so on. Then there are supposed to be more immoral actions, which I don't know what they are, and then there's supposed to be an attack by the ally, which isn't really possible because the idea of the attack is that the ally is attacking the immoral actions that the protagonist is taking, but if I don't know what those immoral actions are, there's no reason for the attack, so stuck. Then obsessive drive, so I think at this point this is when they discover the opponent is planning an uprising with the mages, and they need to stop it. I'm not sure if they know that he has the MacGuffin at this stage or if they find out later. In fact, I'm not sure in the last version of the book. I know when they find out, but I don't know if it's before or after they find out about the uprising. So I'm not sure whether I should reread it or not, because at this stage I'm trying to just go with this with what's in my head. And I feel like if I reread it, then I'd be more tied up with what I already have than I am now, which would make this more difficult, which is why I haven't been reading it. But Yeah, now I'm not sure if I should. Let me know if you think I should read my book in the comments. Anyway, they discover he's planning an uprising, they need to stop it. Not sure which immoral actions come out of here, and this set of immoral actions I'm not sure about because I'm not sure at what point in the plot that obsessive drive moment happens. Like, is that the midpoint? Is it later? Because then I need to, like, that informs how much time these immoral actions need to take. So that's also blank. Then battle is the final epic dungeon scene battle, which I love and I'm going to keep. The final action against the opponent I'm not going to say because spoilers. The moral self-revelation is that Daramon isn't the utopia she thought it was, and sometimes progress can come at too great a cost. And her moral decision is freeing the mages, which I mentioned earlier. I'm going to put her and Aubrey in a position where they basically have a choice between leaving the door to the dungeon locked so they can just burn, or freeing them. And the reason this is a difficult choice is because freeing them puts Daramon at risk, which is her home, it's this utopia, it's what she believes in. And it's not like she's actively burning them anyway, she's just not doing anything. So it's free the mages, do the right thing, versus let them out but potentially destroy this city that she loves and believes in. There's also going to be like an extra carrot for keeping them locked up, which is Rain's going to organise to get them both what they want, what their desires were at the beginning of the book. But that's more just an extra sweetener to the deal as opposed to the true moral dilemma. So those two things happen, and the moral decision happens before the battle. I don't know if that's okay, but as I mentioned earlier, if I leave it until after the battle, then it doesn't really have any impact on this book. So I feel like it needs to happen a little bit earlier. Thematic revelation, yeah, the ends don't justify the means. And that's what I have. So there are gaps. It's not complete, but I don't feel like I'm going to get any further with this until I start doing work in later parts of the book. And I feel like if I look at the later stages, then I'll be able to fill in those gaps, hopefully. So all in all, this is probably the most disappointing chapter of The Anatomy of Story so far, and it has nothing to do with The Anatomy of Story, it just has to do with my inability to complete it. And the other thing that's a little bit disheartening is that because I hadn't read this before writing Powerless, it's actually making me question whether, like, Powerless is a decent book or whether I should just throw it out and start again, because, like, I suppose there are moral questions, and in fact some of them are even the same as this. Like, this is about the rights of the mages, there's a lot of stuff about rights of supers in Powerless, but I didn't plan it with this structure. I don't feel like there is that question around immoral actions, and I'm worrying if, like, I need to follow this in order for it to be a good book, or whether it's still possible for it to be a good book even without doing this. So yeah, let me know what you think, because I do really want to get it to the stage where it's ready for submission next year. I just don't know if I can do that with minor revisions and adding in some missing scenes, which is what I originally thought, or whether, like, I need to try and pull it apart and do the same thing that I'm doing for my fantasy hot mess here. So let me know what you think. Do you think, like, having this sort of moral argument communicated through the structure of your story is necessary to make it a good story? So let me know in the comments. Other than that, if you like this video, please give me a big thumbs up because it helps with YouTube and the algorithm and everything. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to see if I make it out of the rest of Anatomy of Story alive. And I will see you next time. Bye.